Thank you very much for this interview, Mr. Rέγκλινγκ. It seems that coronavirus is hurting seriously the world economy. Today, there is a panic that has hit the global markets and the oil prices crash. So my first question is this: what kind of threat do you think that we are dealing with?
Well, we have a health problem in the world, and it started in Asia and China. The good news is that China, I think, has seen the worst. So they are now beyond the peak of the crisis, and they are returning to normality, which is important for the Chinese economy, for the world economy, because there were some supply problems, as Chinese producer could not supply products that are needed in Europe and the United States. And also the demand coming from China for European exports should normalize. So that's the good news. But now we feel in Europe the virus much more than 2 months ago. And I think in Europe the peak is still ahead of us. So the health problems related to the virus will probably intensify the next few weeks. And what we are worried about now are the economic consequences of that. And they depend, of course, how long the virus will have its negative impact. Nobody knows. But I think it's realistic to expect now that growth worldwide will be lower than what we thought 2 or 3 months ago. So growth will be lower in Asia, in China, but also now clearly in Europe. And we have to live with the consequences.
Is it only this, or there are fears that maybe the world is headed to a new recession area?
That's not to be excluded. I think it's very clear that growth in the first half of 2020 will be visibly lower than what we expected 1 or 2 months ago. How much is very hard to say, but I think it will be clearly below previous expectations. The markets are reacting to that, but markets also overreact once they start moving. We already had that beginning last week. The oil price war that is now happening is totally unrelated to the virus. It comes on top of everything. It will affect a number of companies. So this adds to the very hectic developments in the markets. But when I put it all together, I think we have to prepare for a significantly lower growth rate this year than we thought recently.
What can we do in Europe in order to stop this? I mean, there's an upcoming Eurogroup on the 16th of March. Should we expect any special urgent measures?
Well, the Eurogroup started talking about that already last week. There was a conference call. The Greek finance minister participated in that, of course. And we are preparing now the Eurogroup in a week from today, next week, Monday. And certainly the ministers will exchange views, what can be done, what is reasonable. I think one measure that will be important to take is to provide liquidity to companies that are affected by the economic consequences of the crisis. Because if there's a temporary liquidity shortfall, we do not want that a number of companies go bankrupt. I think then it's important to help them. There are different ways to do that, and different countries have different instruments for that. Some of them are being adopted, like Germany adopted a few of those crisis measures last night. And ministers in the Eurogroup in a week will talk about that, what makes sense, what are the available instruments in every country that can help to get through this temporary significant deterioration in economic developments.
But these are national measures. What about European measures? I mean, are there any thoughts about measures that could stimulate the growth? For example, a decrease of taxes or something?
Well, I don't think there will be decisions that taxes should be reduced in every country. I don't think that is the role of the Eurogroup at this point. I think it's important to learn from other countries what are useful measures to get through this temporary problem. Although it's a serious problem, it's a temporary problem. And implementing liquidity measures is one way. Having systems that exist in some countries to keep people on the payroll. They may work shorter hours, but they get their salaries and wages, is another way to get through such temporary problems. We gained some experience in different countries with that in 2009, but I would not expect that there's now one decision for all of Europe. I think the situation differs country by country, and also the instruments that are available differ country by country.
But as I understand, there are thoughts about the suspension of the Stability Pact. Is it true, and how flexible can we be here?
There's absolutely no need to suspend the Stability and Growth Pact, because the Stability and Growth Pact has flexibilities, particularly in a real crisis. The Stability and Growth Pact has always foreseen that there can be special measures during a crisis. Even the 3% deficit target, which normally is the upper limit for fiscal deficits, can be suspended. I don't think we are that far, but it is a possibility. This is what happened in 2009. There was a collective decision of all countries in the euro area to suspend temporarily this ceiling. But that's part of the pact. So it's not a question of suspending. It's a question of deciding when is the right moment to take such a step. I don't expect that next Monday. But it's good to know that we have the flexibility that might be needed.
Are you afraid of a new debt episode somewhere? I read many analysts, expressing fears about a new debt crisis, about a new debt episode taking place somewhere, and then there is another 2008 crisis.
No, I think we are not close to that. I think we should be prepared for a slowdown in the economy as a result of the virus. And it will be unpleasant, will not be nice. It's unexpected. But I don't see that we are close to a crisis like in 2008 and 2009. And the main reason is that we don't see in the euro area countries with such big macroeconomic imbalances as we saw in 2008 and 2009. Remember Greece as one example, but there were many others at the time, with a fiscal deficit and trade deficits far above 10% of GDP, going up to 15% of GDP. We don't have anything like that at the moment. Countries have improved their competitiveness. Fiscal deficits are much, much lower. No country at the moment has a fiscal deficit above 3% of GDP. So even if there's a kind of deterioration, the starting point is much, much better than in 2008 and 2009.
What about Greece? What will happen to the surpluses issue amid this crisis? Is there any change of plans? And please answer to us whether you are afraid of a relapse of the Greek economy.
So I discussed, of course, with the finance minister the debt sustainability analysis and the fiscal plans for the next few years. There's no final agreement or decision, and that will also take a while, because in the end, decisions have to be taken by the Eurogroup, but it will be prepared by the European institutions. So we need to also discuss it with the European Commission and the European Central Bank, and we will also try to talk with the International Monetary Fund. There are a number of factors that indicate that there's more fiscal room, like the low interest rates, but then there are a number of factors that point in the opposite direction, like lower inflation, higher debt levels. So we have to make an analysis and see how it all adds up in the end. And then, unfortunately, on top, we will have a new situation because of the virus, so which also then requires a new comprehensive analysis and a new comprehensive debt sustainability analysis. We will do that, and we will work very closely with the Greek government. A lapse to the problems of 10 years ago, I don't see at all, because, as I said before, the economic fundamentals today are much, much better. They're in Greece, also in many other countries, but particularly in Greece. Just looking at the fiscal situation, you remember in 2009 there was a deficit of 15% of GDP. Now Greece has an overall fiscal surplus. That's a complete difference. There's a very small current account deficit. 10 years ago, Greek economy had lost competitiveness, and therefore there was a huge current account deficit, which required permanent capital inflows from the rest of the world, big amounts of capital inflows, up to 15% of GDP. All that is different today. So the vulnerability of the Greek economy today is much, much less than 10 years ago. At the same time, growth-oriented reforms are being implemented. I encouraged the finance minister to continue with those reforms, and he made it very clear that this is the intention. Also, the prime minister, when I met him on Saturday, said that these new crises, the virus and the migration issues, do not mean that reforms will become less, maybe the opposite.
But it might mean, as you said before, a decrease of growth. And as I understand, it's one step at a time. I mean, it will all depend at the end of the day on the escalation of the virus.
Sure, there's uncertainty. We don't know. I think it's necessary, unfortunately, to prepare for lower growth figures for this year, particularly for the first half of the year. And that's outside the control of the Greek government. But the fundamentals are so much better. And in addition, of course, more than half the Greek public debt today is with the ESM. And we charge very low interest rates. The Greek budget benefits from that massively. According to our estimates, 12 billion euro in saved interest payments due to debt relief measures and our low interest rates. So despite the fact that the debt is as high as 10 years ago, the debt service payments are much, much lower. And in addition, our money, the money from EFSF and ESM, will be with Greece for the next 40 years on average. We will not withdraw the money when a crisis hits, like private creditors could do it. So that also provides a lot more stability.
Do you have any specific projections about the efficiency of the European economy for the first trimester? I mean, while we have this coronavirus.
I cannot quantify that at the moment. I think everybody is now adjusting forecasts, but we don't have a comprehensive forecast. So I think it's safe to assume that growth will be less, and it will be significantly less, but I cannot quantify today.
Central banks, do they have any crucial role to play in this crisis, Mr. Rέγκλινγκ? Decreasing interest rate, for example, would it give good results?
Well, that's up to the central banks to decide, but they always have tools available. It doesn't have to be low interest rates because they are already very low. But for instance, if the question of liquidity becomes important, we talked about that, and I think liquidity is a crucial issue now where governments can do something, but also the ECB through targeted programs can do something. So it's not as if they are powerless. They will look at the situation, and I have full confidence that the ECB will do what is necessary. Mm-hmm.